Meta. As you know, my name is David. I'm the creator and host of CVS. And today I'm going to talk about doubt, faith, and reason. I've mentioned before that I have no formal training in philosophy, but I do love playing with ideas. And what's been on my mind lately has been a sort of obsession with doubt, faith, and reason. This is really just going to be a brainstorming session, but to help with the exploration of these ideas, I did put together a little infographic. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see the image on your screen with the Venn diagram. And if you're listening on SoundCloud, you should also see that Venn diagram. A Venn diagram is simply a schematic drawing, typically done with overlapping circles. And it allows us to map out schematically logical relations that exist among a finite set of ideas. If some of you that are listening don't have access to the image that I'm going to be referencing, you can always go to my website. My website, of course, is cvs-podcast.com. I think it'll be easier for you to listen to this if you have the image before you, but hopefully you can get something out of it just by my description of the relations that I am exploring among these three faculties of the human soul, namely doubt, faith, and reason. And I start with doubt because my journey into the church began with I think, therefore I am. It was actually while reading René Descartes' Discourse on Method, precisely in that chapter where he talks about solipsism and where he offers a solution to solipsism, and where he introduces the notion of solipsism, which we arrive at by way of a radical skepticism or a radical doubt. If you're looking at my Venn diagram, you'll see in the bottom left a blue segment, which is labeled nihilism. This is where doubt alone resides. The faculty of doubt is active and the faculties of faith and reason are not being used. And of course, it's an unattainable state of being. It's an extreme on a three-pole spectrum. It's a tendency. And the remedy for excessive doubt, the remedy for that, obviously is Roman Catholicism, but to get from nihilism to Roman Catholicism, the practical steps you need to take will involve those other two faculties, faith and reason. If we're pulled out of our nihilism by injecting reason into our worldview, we'll end up with solipsism. Because reason will tell us that when we deny our existence, we are also affirming it, therefore we exist. This is classic René Descartes, Discourse on Method. So with just a little bit of reason, you can go from nihilism, which is horrible, to solipsism, which is lonely, it's dizzying, but I'd rather be dizzy than drowning in the utter blackness of nihilism. Imagine now on the bottom right of my drawing a green segment, and it's labeled agnosticism. This is reason alone, without doubt, without faith. Why would I say that that lends itself to agnosticism, or that it could be characterized as a hard agnosticism? Why would I say that? Because you don't doubt the sense data that's coming to you, but you don't accept it. You don't submit to it. You judge everything without committing. Your judgment is impoverished because of the lack of doubt and because of the lack of faith, which would allow your reason to submit to one answer or another concerning whatever sense data is coming your way or concerning whatever logical proposition crosses your mind. Your judgment is paralyzed by a sort of freedom. Many, many atheists have recourse to an inordinate agnosticism because the determinist can honestly say, Yes, there are only natural causes for every natural effect that we're able to observe, and in principle for the effects that we're not able to observe. Whether those natural causes are observable in and of themselves or not, in practice, in principle, they are all natural, because that's my agnostic atheistic worldview, that there's no supernatural. So those atheists I respect because they are being logically consistent. So they don't need to hide behind agnosticism. But the atheist who wants to have his cake and eat it too, that atheist is not being honest. That atheist is hiding behind a false and inordinate agnosticism. When I ask them, do you believe in the principle of sufficient reason? They say yes. When I ask them if they believe in the supernatural, they say no, they do not believe in the supernatural. When I ask them if, therefore, everything is determined, they answer either no, or I don't know, or we can't know, or maybe, anything but yes. Well, you just said for yourself, you just affirmed that everything has a sufficient cause, everything has a sufficient reason, and you also just affirmed that each and every one of those causes is purely natural. It's not like we're juggling 100 propositions and trying to hold an image in our mind of some sort of complex shape that they form. There are two propositions. Everything has a cause, and every one of those causes is natural. This is not rocket science, people. We are capable intellectually of holding those two ideas simultaneously in our mind. It's called hard determinism. But so many atheists cower. They slip through my hands with the feigned and inordinate agnosticism. It's really sad to watch. It's really sad to hear. This is what happens when we don't have sufficient recourse to doubt and to faith. Now, if we're in that agnosticism, that hard agnosticism, one way out is to introduce doubt and then to go into solipsism. Because as we've already discussed, doubt plus reason equals solipsism when there's no faith. Because it does require a leap of faith to acknowledge the physical universe and the other. The only thing we can know with certainty is I am. And this, by the way, is the name of God. I am. When Moses asked the name of God in the burning bush, God said his name, I am. Tell your people my name is I am. So people mock and ridicule me when I talk about solipsism as being the only rational alternative to Roman Catholicism. But I hope in making the tour of this Venn diagram of doubt, faith, and reason, that it'll be abundantly clear to everyone that it is the only rational alternative to Roman Catholicism. It's an impoverished worldview, solipsism. It's a sad, lonely, false, ridiculous worldview, but it's the most rational alternative to Roman Catholicism. Because when you're depriving yourself of faith, it's either drowning in the blackness of nihilism, doubting everything including your own existence, or saying maybe to absolutely everything. Shrugging your shoulders. I don't know. We can't know. You're drowning in a sea of question marks. I think it was Chesterton who said, when you're an atheist, the danger is not that you will believe nothing, it's that you will believe absolutely anything. That's agnosticism. That's reason unhinged from faith and from doubt. It's quite odd. I would think that more agnostic atheists would swing toward that doubt pole and thereby end up in solipsism. I think it really is the most rational place for an atheist. But oddly enough, today at least, Most agnostic atheists tend to move in the other direction, up towards faith. And they end up being fanatical atheists, where they know that there is no God. They know that we can know this and that we can't know this. So they maintain perhaps a certain agnosticism, but it becomes an ossified or a hardened agnosticism, where it is not subject to doubt. So I think that's interesting. Now, if we continue around counterclockwise, we'll come to a little yellow segment called fanaticism. And the reason that I call it fanaticism is this is the product of reason plus faith. What it does is it says, okay, I am taking a leap of faith. Whatever it might be a German idealism, or it may be a form of atheistic materialism, or it may be some religion. It could even be a perverted form of Roman Catholicism. The reason I've labeled this zone of faith plus reason minus doubt fanaticism is because you've taken a leap of faith. You are able to judge, but you're not able to test your judgments with doubt. There's a whole set of propositions for whatever reason that this fanatic has accepted, and it's impervious in their mind to doubt. It's been enshrined dogmatically in the darkest sense of the word dogmatically, because I am a dogmatist. I believe in dogma, and I am leaning on dogma and dependent on dogma for my worldview. Everyone but the nihilist and the agnostic does depend on dogma. The nihilist doubts the dogma. He can't cling to the dogma, and the agnostic accepts every dogma as equally true, and for all intents and purposes, therefore, the agnostic doesn't have a hold on a unique set of dogmas. So nihilism and agnosticism do resemble each other in that way. Solipsism, at least, you have the dogma that I am. It's the only dogma. So, the fanaticism of the person who believes, who has taken a leap of faith, has made a calculation or has been presented with a calculation or reasons for believing. You know, there are reasons to believe Islam, so they could accept the reasons to believe Islam, or they could believe the reasons to accept Buddhism, or they could accept the reasons to be a vegan, or they could accept the reasons to be a libertarian, or they could accept this reason or that reason for this worldview or that worldview. But once you abandon doubt, you are a fanatic. You have enshrined and ossified your worldview. There's no room for growth. So much for fanaticism. Moving along counterclockwise now on my Venn diagram, up to the top where faith resides. This red segment I've labeled fideism. Now, fideism, for those of you that don't know, is the worldview that says that faith is the means to knowledge. So epistemologically, this is the only way, faith. There is no doubt. There is no reason. There's only faith. The Muslims and the Protestants have been accused of fideism. Most famously, I would say, in Pope Benedict XVI's famous or infamous Regensburg address in Germany. And he talked in polite but clear terms about Immanuel Kant's fideism, that we don't have access to a meaningful grip onto reality. We're stuck in the phenomenal world, and the noumenal world is not available to us. We cannot access it. We're isolated from that. There's a chasm there that we just cannot cross. So fideism is a very real tendency. I think I've already mentioned, I don't need to keep drilling it in, that these extreme cases are meant to represent poles or tendencies, and I really don't expect to find a true nihilist, a true hard agnostic, a true fideist, but they're tendencies. Now, if we continue moving around to the sixth and final imbalanced portion of this philosophical map, we come to a pink zone on the upper left, which I call naive realism. This really is the majority of human beings walking this planet throughout the history of the world, I think. Naive realism is basically the place where you're not making judgments. You haven't thought about everything. You haven't thought about much other than where's my next meal coming from and how can I get into the pants of that hot secretary at work, or whatever the case may be. Maybe a good word for this would be cynicism in the old sense of the word. Cynicism originally meant dog-like. Cynicism is really caninism. Those are the two linguistic equivalents. You're like a beast following your nose, sniffing the scents. Follow your passions. Seek pleasure, avoid pain. This is the original Greek philosophical meaning of cynicism. Perhaps that's a better label for this segment of the philosophical map that I've put together here, because it really doesn't question much. It really just is content to pursue these assumed goods. And of course, pleasure is good, and shelter is good, and food is good, and sex is one of the highest goods. So they're not wrong. But there's a higher good still. There's a highest good. The naive realist, or the cynic, will content himself with good and better, and it doesn't seem to occur to him that there is, implied in that logically and necessarily, a best. Particularly atheists, when they're naive realists, they will talk about justice. They will talk about the injustices of the Inquisition. And they will rant and rave about the injustices of the Catholic Crusades. They will rant and rave about this injustice and that injustice in the history of the Church. And when asked about justice, the atheist will always say, there is no justice. In the big picture, there is no justice. The accounts are not settled for the atheist. There is no justice for the naive realist atheist. And yet, they will point to that justice. They will raise that bar of justice or goodness or beauty or whatever it is. Out of one side of their mouth, they will be holding up the standards of perfection. And out of the other side of their mouth, they're denying those very standards that they want to preach. Yes, they believe, perhaps, in the real world. Yes, they believe in the other. Yes, they have the capacity to doubt and to take a side this way or that way, to say yes to one thing and to say no to another. But they haven't examined their assumptions. They've just accepted them. They've swallowed them. To move them out of this naive realism, what they need is more reason. Judgment. Examine your worldview. Examine the assumptions that you take for granted. Look at the standards that you're applying to others and ask yourself if you are acknowledging that standard as objective and real, or if it's merely wordplay. Is it just a power trip? It doesn't might really make right. Or is there an objective, eternal, absolute quality to things like justice, goodness, morality, beauty, love, peace, whatever it is? You're hopping on a bandwagon and you're not examining the principles. And if you examine the principles, you will find contradiction, and then you will modify your set of assumptions and you will modify your principles until they conform with reality and they cohere among themselves. It's the pursuit of truth. This is what philosophy is about. It's the love of wisdom, the pursuit of truth in a disinterested way. It means we're not fanatical about what we believe. It means we don't take for granted what we believe. And it means that we're not stuck in solipsism thinking that only I am. Those are sort of the three mixed messages that most people walk around with. Most people do act like narcissistic solipsists to a large extent, but they will never admit that that's where they are. When I was a solipsist, I knew that I was a solipsist, and I accepted it. I wasn't very happy. I was bewildered. It was quite a trip, and it didn't last too long. I mean, it wasn't too long until the right books fell into my hands, and I just made that tiny leap of faith that René Descartes talks about so nonchalantly, as if it's an afterthought. Well, of course God is good. Of course God is God. Of course I'm not God. René Descartes is not given enough credit, I believe, in the history of philosophy. He's seen as a rationalist. His faith is disparaged. And I know he's not a Catholic saint. He's not canonized. There were errors, obviously, that he taught with regard to theology. And he was somewhat unorthodox, but he did have faith. He did preach a leap of faith as the solution and the only solution to solipsism. He made no bones about it, and he didn't dwell on it. So I really think that we need to give more credit to René Descartes. And I personally owe him a debt of gratitude because he was instrumental in pulling me out of my solipsism into Roman Catholicism. So my thesis here with this doubt, faith, reason map, my thesis is that only one worldview is balanced. Only one worldview has the proper proportion of the faculties of faith, doubt, and reason. Only one worldview. It's the one true religion, the one true church, founded by truth incarnate, founded by Jesus Christ. You might want to ask yourself as an exercise, to which am I attracted and from which am I repulsed? And to what degree, and so on and so forth. There are interesting questions that we can ask ourselves about where we might land on this diagnostic map. I am confident that I'm a Roman Catholic. I am accused of fanaticism, but I am full of a healthy and balanced doubt. Doubt is essential to my faith. And to plug your ears when I say that is not a refutation. For example, I was talking to someone on Facebook recently, and she said to me, "You're utterly convinced that you have it all figured out." She said, "You use philosophy and logic to justify your views. You haven't proved anything," she said. "You've assumed something and then rationalized it." To which I replied, "But I just admitted, like 5 minutes ago in this very conversation, I just admitted that Jesus Christ might be a false Messiah. That's possible, in principle. I don't believe that, but I know with certainty that it's, in principle, a possibility. This is not to disparage Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, but it's an acknowledgement that I am fallible. I may be a brain in a vat. There's actually no way for me to test that hypothesis. It's only by a leap of faith that I have faith in you. Never mind in Jesus Christ. So yes, I take a leap of faith and I may be wrong. You may not exist and Jesus Christ may not exist. And even if Jesus Christ does exist, he may be a lunatic, a liar, or a mere legend. I don't think any of those three possibilities hold water. I'm not tempted to believe, as the Muslims say, that he was not crucified. I'm not tempted to believe any of the lies about Jesus Christ, but in principle, one or more of them may be true. I don't have logical, unconditional certainty. My certainty in Christ depends on a set of assumptions. First and foremost among these assumptions is that I am not God. I'm not utterly convinced that I have it all figured out. I'm not trying to justify some arbitrary philosophical point of view. I have taken a leap of faith, just like you. And from that leap of faith, reason tells me that Jesus Christ is Lord. Reason, not faith. Reason tells me. The fact that you exist That requires a leap of faith. The fact that Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, that presupposes the leap of faith that you exist. But once I've made that leap of faith, I don't need really much more faith. I just need to apply reason to that. Okay, so the material world exists. The principle of sufficient reason is valid. The laws of thermodynamics are true. An effect cannot be greater than or more perfect than its cause. We have the laws of thought behind all of that also. A is not A, either A or not A. These are the laws of thought. All of that comes as a package deal with that first leap of faith from solipsism into a belief in the other and in the real world. Socrates talked about this over 2,000 years ago. The simile of the line. There are different kinds of knowledge, and the first one is opinion, based on what we witness. And then we have a sort of empirical science way of knowing. And then we have reason added on top of that. And finally, we get to the highest place on that line, which is wisdom, a sort of intuitive knowledge of the forms, these universals. We need to learn to know. Without faith, we cannot get very far. Without reason, we cannot get very far. And without doubt, we cannot get very far. We need all three. Pascal puts it pretty nicely when he talks about submission in his Pensées. Number 268, 269, and 270. I'll read you these three, but there's a lot more. There are obviously a lot of good things in the Pensées. But what he has to say about submission, I think, ties in nicely with this faith, doubt, reason map that I put together. And I want to give credit not only to Pascal, but I want to give credit to Dr. Peter Kraft. Although I'd been thinking about these ideas for many months, I recently discovered a talk that he gave about doubt, faith, and reason, which was interesting and which gave me a lot of food for thought, and which also pointed me to this passage that I'm about to read you from Pascal. I think Peter Kraft gave the wrong reference, Pensée number 170, when it's really Pensée 268, 269, and 270. Those are the ones I'm going to read anyway. When I looked up 170, it had nothing to do with submission. The heading for this little part of his Pensée is submission. And so he says, we must know where to doubt, where to feel certain, where to submit. He who does not do so understands not the force of reason. There are some who offend against these three rules, either by affirming everything as demonstrative, from want of knowing what demonstration is, or by doubting everything, from want of knowing where to submit, or by submitting in everything, from want of knowing where they must judge. Submission is the use of reason in which consists true Christianity. And then he quotes St. Augustine, who said, quote, reason would never submit if it did not judge that there are some occasions on which it ought to submit. It is then right for it to submit when it judges that it ought to submit. End quote. That's a quote by St. Augustine, cited by Blaise Pascal in Pensée 270. He talks about three rules: doubt, certainty, and submission. So his doubt corresponds with my doubt. His certainty corresponds with my reason. And his submission corresponds, I claim, and Peter Kraft also claims, with faith. And he says that if you don't balance doubt reason and faith, then you don't understand reason. That's what Pascal says. And then he goes on to talk about how we can abuse the balance of these three. We can introduce an imbalance. And how do we do that? Well, there are 3 ways of introducing imbalance, according to Pascal. Affirming everything as demonstrative, because we don't know what demonstration is. That to me would be a sort of fanatical materialism, a logical positivism, scientism, which in my mind is a combination of reason and faith. So that's one of his 3. The second form of imbalance, he says, is those who doubt everything because they don't know where to submit. This is a lack of faith. I didn't know where to submit, and I didn't submit. I didn't have faith, and I ended up in solipsism. And the third area of imbalance that he talks about is when we submit to everything and we don't know how to judge. This is that cynical, naive realism, following your nose, doing what feels good. Committing, yes. Going with the pack, hopping on the bandwagon. You have passion, you have spirit, you have lust for life, but you haven't thought it through. You don't know how to judge. This is what I call naive realism. The unexamined life is not worth living, and this is what we're talking about. If you don't judge, you'll submit fully, but unthinkingly. This is the mob mentality. I see it, I'm subjected to it every day. It's dangerous and it's out of control. Why is it out of control? Because there's no self-reflection. There's no stock taking. There's no challenging of underlying assumptions because they aren't submitted to judgment. And I can tell you that when I poke and prod and I judge their underlying assumptions, their cherished assumptions, they're not too happy. Socrates was fond of calling himself a gadfly because he wanted to question the underlying assumptions and the unquestioned beliefs of his fellow man, walking around the marketplace, complacent in the worst sense of the word. These people didn't question what they believed. And they killed Socrates because he annoyed them. And I think that that is the role of the philosopher. That's the role of the prophet too. The role of the priest is to teach. The role of the prophet is to preach and to goad. And of course, the role of the king is to govern. I, in my temperament, am much more of a preacher. I'm much more of a prophet. I'm much more of a Socratic goad or gadfly than a teacher. I have close friends criticizing me. Why don't you try a different approach when you're trying to teach people about your faith? It's because I'm not trying to teach them about my faith. That's not my strength. It's not my interest. I'm in love. I'm in love with God. I'm proclaiming. I'm not explaining. I'm not smart enough to explain anyway, even if I wanted to. But I can defend. If you want me to call down fire on the mountain, I guarantee you my God's going to win. Not because I'm better, but because my God's better. Your gods are demons. I realize that it's painful and it's uncomfortable. I realize that my message is unwanted. I realize that my approach is ridiculous. I'm a fool. I'm a fool for Christ. And I realize that people are very comfortable in their first-class luxury dining room on a sinking ship. I know that they're comfortable. I know that the food they're eating is delicious. I know that the rhythm of the music and the dancing and the warm body pressed up against you as the alcohol flows through your veins, I know that that's all intoxicating. And I know that you want to enjoy that moment and you want to go back to your little cabin with your companion and enjoy ecstasy. I know that. But we've hit an iceberg, sir, and we're going down. Please make your way to the lifeboats out on the cold and rainy deck. Now. It can't wait till morning. I know that you're drunk. I know that you're horny. I know that you're selfish and that you want what you want. I know that. I'm the same. Do you think that I do not want what you want? Of course I want what you want. But let's get off this sinking ship first. How's that? And I guarantee you better food, better music, better dancing companions, and peace, joy, and happiness. So I understand that people don't like to hear that. I'm well aware of how I rub people the wrong way. And I know that I'm far from perfect and that there's definitely room for improvement. But I am in love. And I love you too. I love you for God's sake. So I do love you. I do want you to go to heaven, and I do want you to have more of everything that you're enjoying right now. Just make sure that you get on the lifeboat. There's a time and place. So this is the time of pilgrimage between Paradise Lost and heaven. Let's treat it that way. Let's not get too attached to the goods of this created world. That's my stern warning and my friendly advice to friend and foe alike. If you're interested in being my guest, as always, get in touch. I'll interview anyone of any worldview, as long as you know who you are, or as long as you think you know who you are and what you believe and why you believe it, and you're excited about it and you want to talk about it. If you're excited, I'm excited. So just get in touch. Interviews are always friendly, they're informal, and they're unprepared. We just talk. And you always get the first word, you get the last word, and in between we're just talking about you, your worldview, what you believe, and if you'd like to ask a few questions about what I believe or you want to challenge what I believe, you're free to do that as well. And then you wrap up with a little final thought to the listener. So it's really easy, and it's usually a lot of fun. Thanks for listening. Take care, and we'll talk soon. God bless.